Hi, and welcome to this special episode of Rights for Women. My name is Rae Cairns, and it's my absolute pleasure to be speaking with debut crime author Mercedes Mercier about her edge of your seat thriller, White Noise. Mercedes, welcome to the Convo Couch.
Thank you so much, Rae. I'm really thrilled to be here.
Your book was launched on Tuesday night by the fabulous author NED KELLY. How does it feel having your book out in the world finally?
Oh my gosh, it feels amazing. I'm still on such a high. I'm still buzzing after Tuesday night, after the launch. I couldn't sleep. I was awake till 2 or 3 in the morning, just like lying there, just reliving everything in my mind. It's just, I don't think anything can fully prepare you for really how exciting it is. Like, you hear debut authors talking on podcasts about their journey, but once you're actually living it, it's just amazing. It's even more amazing than I thought it was going to be.
And the reactions have been great. People are loving the book. The pictures of the launch were amazing. Gosh, it looked gorgeous.
Thank you. Yes, I was really lucky to have the first author book launch at the new Dimmicks in Adelaide in Rundle Mall. And that space is just beautiful. It's the old Regent Theatre that they've renovated. It's got the beautiful corniced ceiling, lots of space, lots of light, lots of air. It's just, I was so honoured to be the first one in there, and it went smoothly. The staff were wonderful. Everything was just, I couldn't have asked for a better launch.
That's so special. That's amazing. I was lucky enough to read an advanced copy of White Noise, and I loved the fast-paced, twisty story and really liked the strong female lead facing complex issues. But for listeners who haven't had a chance to read it, can you tell us a bit about White Noise?
Sure. So White Noise follows Laura Fleming, who's a psychologist at Westmead Prison in New South Wales, and that's a fictional prison. And she faces off against a charming and manipulative inmate. Now, he wants to be released to parole. He's coming up to his time where he can apply for parole. And he's so charming and so manipulative. He's also very handsome, so he's got that going for him too. So he's basically got everyone in the prison on his side, and everyone is believing that he's this reformed inmate and he's ready to be released. He's done his time. They've done their job in rehabilitating him. Laura, her job is to assess his suitability, his risk for being released into the community. And she writes a risk assessment and writes up her thoughts and what she thinks from her professional opinion. But she sits in sessions with him and she starts to think, actually, I don't think this guy is ready to be released early. I've got my suspicions that there's something going on below the surface that everyone else has missed a little bit. So she has to race to find evidence before his parole hearing that her suspicions are true. And as she starts doing that, she starts to fall victim to a series of increasingly personal threats. And then amongst that, secrets from her past threaten to unhinge sort of everything that she holds dear in her life.
Yeah, she has a lot going on.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know what sparked the idea for the story.
So I have worked in corrections for the last 8 years, and I love it. There's just so many interesting stories that go beyond what you think of when you think of the prison system. You obviously think of all the danger and the tension and everything that goes on in that aspect. But I also get to see the wonderful things that happen, the staff that works so hard to rehabilitate offenders that come in and they leave so different and they don't come back. And so one day I was talking to one of my friends who's a psychologist with us, and she was just talking about some of the things she has to do and how she's doing a risk assessment for an inmate who's coming up for parole. And I thought, wow, that is a huge amount of responsibility to have on someone's shoulders, and deciding professionally whether this person is rehabilitated, whether they are safe to be released out into the community, whether they're not going to reoffend. And I just thought, this is a huge responsibility to have on someone's shoulders. And I just thought that would make a really, really interesting story. And what happens if I pitted this really smart, savvy psychologist against this really manipulative, charming inmate who would do anything to be released early.
And who's equally as smart.
Exactly. So her pitting her against sort of her equal. And then I loved the idea that he had everyone else in the prison fooled. So she was up against this wall of contention, and she was the only one, and she had to really delve deep and rest on her convictions to go against everyone and do what she believed was right.
Yeah. Your protagonist, Dr. Laura Fleming, has a lot going on.
She does.
She's got that. She's kind of having to balance that huge responsibility at work and with her home life, with her daughter and her ex-husband, while also wrestling with the consequences of a traumatic event from her past. So you've explained that you have a psychologist friend. What gave you the idea for the story, but what gave you the inspiration for Laura?
I think, to be honest, there's quite a lot of me in Laura.
Okay.
I think I liked the idea of someone who, despite everything she sees in her professional life, like she sees the worst of humanity. She sees the people that have done these awful crimes, so awful that they've had to be locked away from the rest of society for society's safety.
Yeah.
And she sees that every day, and she sees what these people do when they're behind bars, and she sees the reoffending. She sits in sessions with them and she hears their motivation or their lack of motivation for their crimes. And she doesn't let that weigh her down and make her bitter, I guess. She still has this idealism and this hope for humanity, and she still believes in redemption, and she still believes that people can turn their lives around and can become better people than what they were. And I really loved that personality trait and that part of her, because I think I'm quite idealistic as well, and I believe that people can change and they can better themselves, and if they get the right supports and they get the right everything around them that they might not have had previously, that the opportunities that other people might not have had growing up, that they can become that version of themselves that that they've always wanted to. Yes. So I loved the idea of putting Laura through a whole lot of traumatic stuff, like showing her that she's carrying all this trauma, she's got all this stuff going on in her personal life, but she's still so committed to her job, and she's still so committed to doing what she loves despite all of that. She just wants to do what's best for other people, and I really loved that character trait, I think.
Did she arrive fully formed as a character, or did she develop over the various drafts?
I think she was pretty much fully formed. Before I started writing, I sat down and I did a character sheet. I did her likes, her dislikes, her quirks, that kind of stuff. But I didn't actually really end up using it. I found it again towards the end of the first draft, and I was like, oh, I didn't really include much of this sort of stuff in it in the end. She just came to me as I wrote, and as I kept writing, she just kept developing.
It's funny, that first bit's almost like you were meeting at a party for the first time and getting to know her, and then you really got to know her when you wrote her.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's pretty much exactly how it happened. Yeah.
I thought it was really clever that you had Laura battling her own body as well throughout the story, because she has ringing in her ears as a result of a traumatic event. I loved what it brought to the story. And I was wondering, does this come from personal experience for you or someone?
It doesn't actually. I was researching trauma and how the body reacts to traumatic events. And I read a lot into tinnitus, and I thought, gosh, what an awful, awful thing to have. Imagine just carrying with you for everywhere you go. You just this low-level ringing or buzzing. It's different in everyone who has it. There's different levels. But I just thought, imagine this permanently, this noise in your head that you can never get rid of. You can never have a quiet, peaceful head at any point in your life. And then when things start getting stressful and you start working yourself up, it gets so much worse, and it just really adds to what you're experiencing already and makes it even worse. And I just thought, gosh, it would be so interesting and so awful to be in that position. So I thought, I just loved the concept of just adding that on top. And it was also it displays physically what she's feeling mentally as well. So it was a good sort of reflection and a good sort of trigger, that as soon as that tension started ramping up, that's when her ear would start ramping up, and it just would explode into this claustrophobic mental being stuck in your head, both mentally and physically.
And then there are times she actually has to try and think through that, which it was very clever. I thought it was a very clever addition to the story.
Thank you. And that's where the title came in as well. That white noise that's always in the back of her head. She's just sleeping, thinking, driving, everything. It's there.
Yeah, it was really well done. So let's move on to research, because you've got a lot of characters in the book, ranging from paramedics to police officers to psychologists, and you're dealing with issues of addiction and I guess PTSD as well. Can you tell us a bit about your research for the book?
Sure. So before I started writing, I probably did around a month of really intensive research. And of course, I still had to do lots of research that cropped up as I was writing.
Yeah.
Thankfully, because I've got my background in correction, the prison stuff, that side of stuff just came so easily. It was just basically I sat down and that side of things just flowed out of me. And because I love talking about the correctional system. I had to almost rein myself back and make sure I didn't bore people with the ins and outs and the timings of what time inmates get breakfast, what time their cells are unlocked every day.
I thought that was really interesting, like the insight into the prison system and stuff was a really interesting part of the story. So you kept it interesting. You didn't add too much.
Oh, good. Yeah, so I didn't really have to do too much on that front, but I did have to do a whole lot of research on the psychology front. So the role of psychologists in prisons, and I guess just psychology in general. And I was lucky that one of my good friends is a psychologist in our department. So I got to really grill her and ask her all the ins and outs and the psychology around violent offenders, repeat offenders, narcissists, all that kind of stuff, like how she would approach a session with a murderer, how she would approach a session with.
I thought that was really interesting that she was in a room with you, assessing
and that's what happens. That's what happens. Yeah, it's a soundproof, like it's fully safe room, and they sit in there and they talk to them, and that's how they do it. And it's just, I just think these people are just so incredible to go in there and to sit down and to do this day in, day out. So I also had to do some research into, like you said, drug addiction, prescription drug addiction, the effects that had on the body as well, coming off that addiction and breaking that addiction, and how that lingers in your life as well for so long after. And I had to do quite a bit of research into domestic violence and coercive control. Yeah. And I wanted to show a different side of domestic violence, that more sort of insidious underlying breaking down a person's self-esteem, and just those little things that you might not immediately think are controlling behavior, and then they slowly build up until it's just so normal that you have to take a step back out of the world to truly understand what has been going on.
Yeah, because it's so insidious, as you said, and slow.
Yes.
Okay.
And I wanted Laura to, because she is such a smart woman, I wanted to show that kind of coercive control, that kind of, domestic violence, it can happen to any woman.
Yeah.
You can be the top of your game, you can be the smartest, and it's nothing to do with how smart you are, but can be this career woman who from the outside looks like, she would know the nuances of every type of offending
as a
behavior.
Psychologist, you'd assume that she would recognize.
Exactly. But I wanted to show that these things can happen to anyone, and it's So I also, because I set it in New South Wales and I'm from South Australia, I had to do a lot of research into the Sydney front as well. Obviously, I've been to Sydney lots and lots, but I started to write this book during the pandemic. So I couldn't actually travel
to Sydney.
So I couldn't just head up to Sydney and just rewalk the streets of Bondi or anything like that, just to get myself in the headspace. I did end up spending a lot of time on Google Maps, Google Earth.
Google Maps is amazing for research. The fact that you can do the street view and almost walk the streets, it's incredible.
Exactly, and that's exactly what I did. I just walked those streets, essentially, sitting at home and looking around and getting a feel for everything, and had to do lots of like little research, like how long it would take to drive from X suburb to X suburb during peak hour, what driving along, what the view would look like outside of the car, all that kind of stuff that I guess you take for granted that you can do when you travel, and you can just drive those streets and walk those streets and really get yourself into that headspace.
So why should readers get themselves a copy of White Noise? What do you want them to take away from the book?
I think it's a twisting sort of psychological thriller and explores the themes of redemption and revenge, trust and betrayal, mothers and daughters, talks about rehabilitation of inmates, which I think is a subject that isn't discussed a whole lot. Someone commits a crime, people love to push them out of sight, out of mind, put them behind behind those tall prison fences and forget about them. But the reality is the vast majority of people that go to prison will be released, and they're people that will live in most suburbs. Like they'll be at the supermarket with you, they'll be picking the kids up, everything. And you want corrections to have done their job in rehabilitating them and making them, coming out of prison, a better person than they were when they came in, hopefully breaking that cycle of offending, making sure there's fewer victims of crime and keeping the community safe. And so I wanted to shine a light on that aspect of things too, and just the incredible, challenging, dangerous work that actually goes on in the prison system every day that people don't, I guess, get an insight into unless you're in that space.
Yeah, that was a really interesting part of the story, seeing kind of the people who are doing those jobs that we don't even think about.
And prison officers, I find, gets forgotten in the landscape of emergency services. You've got the amazing work that paramedics do, that fireys do, that police officers do. Like they all do absolutely incredible work. The work that prison officers do is also equally as important and as challenging and as rewarding, I guess. And I really wanted to be able to shine a light on that sort of often forgotten side of emergency services.
So let's move on to talking about your writing. Have you always been a writer? Have you always written?
Yes, I've always wanted to be a writer. Even as a kid, I recently found I had this little glittery pink diary and it was just full of stories, just basically nonsensical stories. They all seem to revolve around a girl with long hair. She's still got long hair. And she had a bunny, which I don't have a bunny now, but I do have a dog. So yeah, I've always wanted to be a writer. And I think it's funny, throughout this publication process, I've had so many people message me, out of the blue from my childhood or high school, or saying, I'm so happy for you. I remember you talking about that all you wanted to do was be an author. And I was like, oh, wow, really?
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So the whole process has just been, it's so lovely, just people getting in contact and just saying, I'm so thrilled that you achieved what you always talked about wanting to do.
So what was it that made you sit down and commit seriously to writing?
I think so. For years and years, I had just been writing when I felt like it, basically. When the muse struck, when I was inspired, when I had some spare time, that kind of thing. But I started to realize that wasn't actually getting me anywhere. Writing a few thousand words once a week, it's not conducive to finishing a novel and getting through to that publication process. So in 2016, I did Fiona McIntosh's masterclass, which is a commercial fiction masterclass, which is run by Fiona McIntosh. And when I was there, so you do it over 5 days. And when I was there, she pulled me aside and sat me down, and she was like, I really think you should harness your background in the criminal justice system and write a crime novel. I thought I would absolutely love to. I've read crime my entire life. Like, crime was my favorite genre. Grew up reading it. My mum's a huge crime reader, so we just have shelves and shelves of crime books throughout the house. So that was basically all I read growing up. But I think, I don't know, a part of that, it intimidated me as well, because I'd read so many incredible crime books. I just thought, I can't live up to this. I can't handle all the plot twists and red herrings and everything that crime readers, I guess they expect and they love out of a good crime book. So I thought, oh no, I can't do that. I wrote in some other genres for a few years. So I did a couple of commercial women's fiction manuscripts. I did a couple of romance manuscripts, but I sent those off, but unfortunately there was no success with those. I got quite a few rejections. But then the pandemic hit and I had extra time on my hands. I wasn't driving to and from work, so I had those couple of hours extra free during the day. And I sat down, I thought, why can't I write a crime novel? I can do this. So I stopped letting my self-doubt rule me. And
so jumping back quick, before the Fiona McIntosh, like what inspired you to do the Fiona McIntosh course? What made you go, I'm going to commit that time and effort to writing now?
I think it was the fact that I just wasn't happy with writing being a hobby and something I fit in around my life. I wanted writing to be my career. I wanted it to be something that I could do every day. And I recognized that I needed to do something to expand my knowledge and my skills and to also be around other people who were doing the same thing.
The community.
Exactly. Before that, I didn't really have anyone else in my life that wanted to be a writer. So I didn't have that support and that inspiration, that community, like you said, around me, which made it more difficult as well to stay inspired and to stay on track. So I recognized that I wanted to be around like-minded people. And that's what I got when I did the masterclass, and we're all still friends and talk to each other and
there were
support each other.
photos of them at your launch. It was gorgeous.
They came to my launch, and that was even, there's a massive group of us now because she runs the masterclass a few times a year, and now we're all piled into this big group on Facebook and everyone supports each other and comes out to each other's launches and buys each other's novels, writes reviews, all that kind of stuff. So it's just a wonderful, supportive community to be a part of.
Yeah. So jump forward now. You've sat down, you've braved it, you've written White Noise. What was your path to publication? What kind of happened then? So you've also, importantly, you've had lots of rejections already.
Yes, I know how that feels.
Every writer experiences it.
Yes.
So you've got White Noise in your hand. You've finished it.
Yes.
What happened?
So I finished the first draft and I put it aside. I put it in a drawer for a few weeks. And
how long did it take you to write? Sorry.
It actually only took me around 4 months to write that first draft.
Okay.
But that's because I'm a routine-driven person. I love routine. I sat down when I decided I wanted to write this seriously. I wanted to write this manuscript. I sat down and I gave myself a daily word count of 1,200 words a day, 5 days a week, and I gave myself weekends off. So I would wake up at 5 a.m. every day. And that's when my brain works best. I tried out different times to write, in the evenings after work, weekends, that kind of stuff. But I tried waking up at 5 a.m. and my brain was just on. Okay. So that was my writing time. So I'd get up at 5 a.m. I'd write my 1,200 words a day, 5 days a week, and finished it in around, I think it was around 4 months that I finished it. So I put it away. I put it in a drawer for a few weeks, let it marinate.
Yeah.
Didn't look at it, and in the hope that when I came back to it, I'd be looking at it with fresh eyes and I'd be able to see the mistakes a bit more easily through the editing process. So I did that. I did possibly 3 or 4 rounds of edits myself, but I did recognize that I needed external eyes on it and I needed someone else to have a look at it and tell me what I could improve on and what was working, what wasn't working. So I sent it off to a professional editor who did a structural edit on it, which was incredibly helpful. She picked up on lots of things that I hadn't even seen because I was too close to it. I just couldn't see the forest for the trees. And so she gave me great advice. I implemented that advice. I rewrote it, Rae went through all the editing process. And after that, I
How long
sent
do you
it to...
reckon that process, how long did that process? So 4 months to write the first draft, then you're redrafting and then off to a professional editor. How long was that process?
That took a lot longer than actually writing it. Writing it was the easy part. Yeah. Editing it was the difficult part. That probably took, just trying to think, 8 months, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
A double.
Yeah, exactly, double. And that was just going through it round of edits, like looking at a different thing each edit, copy editing, line editing, structural editing each time, and then going back through it. And I can't count the amount of times that I went through that manuscript before sending it off. And once I'd polished it to what I was really happy and couldn't see any more tweaks that I could make to it, I sent it back to Fiona, and she packaged it up and sent it off to a couple of publishers. And then probably, it was only a couple of weeks later, it felt like months. Yeah, I got word back that Harper Collins are interested.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Very exciting. Okay, so you've got interest from Harper Collins. How long then till signing?
I think that was about 2 weeks between
that
first. It was really fast. And it's quite a funny story for when I got the call. So I'd been working at home and I'd been getting so many spam phone calls from mobile phone numbers, and I was getting like 2 or 3 a day. I don't know what was happening. So I got to the point where if I didn't recognize the phone number, I didn't pick it up, and I just thought, if they want me, they'll leave a message. If not, it's just spam. And I never got any messages. It was always spam for all those months and months. So I was at home, a number popped up on my screen that I didn't recognize. I thought, spam, put it down.
Oh no.
Left the room. And so then I came back and there was a message. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I listened to it, and it was my publisher, the wonderful Roberta Ivers. And he said, oh, hi, Mercedes. I'm hoping you can give me a call back. I've got some good news for you. And I was I knew as soon as I heard that message, I just burst into tears, and then obviously called her back straight away. And yeah, so she offered me the 2-book deal. I felt very sorry for her because I was crying throughout the whole phone call. So she was just having to talk and explain things while I was just sobbing in the background.
Happy tears. It's okay.
Exactly. Yeah. I finally got it together after a couple of minutes, and yeah.
So you signed. How long from the signing to publication?
It was just under a year.
Okay.
So signed around July last year and came out June this year. Yeah. So there was lots of rounds of edits in that process as well, which was great because I'm not good at editing as in self-editing. I'm not good at seeing what needs to be changed myself, but I love getting editing feedback from other people. As soon as I see the feedback, I'm like, yes, of course, that works so well. Why didn't I think of that? Of course I can do that.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of comes from my job as well. Everything I write in my full-time job has to go through multiple rounds of edits. So I was very used to that editing process before, so it made it a lot easier to take on board the feedback and implement it.
And
also when I
astute. Sorry, Roberta Ivers, Mercedes and I share the same publisher, and we call her Bert, and she's just so astute and sees things so clearly.
Absolutely. And every bit of feedback she gave me, I could just see how much stronger it was making the story.
Right.
And it just excited me that every time I got another round of edits, I couldn't wait to see what they were going to be, because I just thought, oh my gosh, this is just making this stronger and more incredible.
That was one of my questions for you, actually, was, so you talked about the themes before of second chances and redemption and revenge and mothers and daughters and a number of other things. were they all in the book when you handed it to Harper Collins, or did you layer them in through the Harper Collins editing process, or had you layered them in through your editing process, or were they there from the very first draft?
It was a little bit different for each of them. I think the redemption theme was there throughout. I went into it wanting that to be one of the major themes that I explored. And I think the mother and daughter sort of theme came out within my own editing. And I think that got stronger and stronger with each edit that I made. The Harper Collins edits, we changed the character of Peter, which is her ex-husband, quite a bit.
Okay.
And we really layered in that coercive control, those subversive domestic violence elements a lot more. Initially, he was a lot more of a mild character, I guess. He was on the sidelines, just like looking at her wearily, just, a little bit more of a passive character. But we really built that character up and made him a lot more of a subversive character as well.
Yeah, because he's a very strong character in the book.
Yes. We brought him forwards and made him more of an aggressor in her life, and another layer of
which is what editing is, isn't it?
Exactly.
Each edit is a new layer, and it deepens the story. And okay, that's really interesting. What was the biggest learning curve in your journey from first deciding to write to Tuesday night when you published your first book? What was the biggest learning curve?
Oh, that's a good question.
So for me, it was learning to apply the feedback and actually embrace it. It wasn't that I rejected it. I knew that any feedback I got was correct, but I had to learn to really embrace it and enjoy it, I guess. Particularly the really problematic things that I had to solve in the manuscript. So, what was yours?
I think mine was, it was learning how much edits, how much a manuscript can change from how you've written it to how it ends up on the shelf, and going through all those processes and all those edits and all those tweaks and all those changes, and learning to let go and to embrace that process and trust that at the end of it, your book is going to be so much stronger and the story is just going to be so much better having gone through that process. And although the story might end up differently to how you'd envisaged it when you first sat down to write that book, that's the process that you go through, and that's the work that goes into making a book that sits on the shelf.
Yeah. So when you set out to write, you talked about you did a month of research, but did you plot out the story, or did you discover the story as you went along?
I'm a little bit of both. I know the main plot points that I'm going to hit throughout, but really only broad. The beginning, middle, and end are very broad. And I sit down having no idea how I'm going to move the story through those plot points.
Right. Yeah. So you know where you're headed is pretty much.
Yes. I know where I'm headed, but I don't know how I'm going to get there. So every morning I'll sit down and I'll write my word count, and if my 1,200 words ends in the middle of a scene, so be it. So I'll pick up in the middle of that scene the next day, and that's often quite helpful because I've got that. I can go straight back into the middle of a scene. I start with that momentum, and then that can carry me through the rest of the day's writing.
Okay, so is that? Oh gosh, that's so interesting that you stop. I've heard of people doing that as a way of picking up the writing the next day. Yeah, I'm intrigued by that. So is it because of the time limitations, or is it just that's what worked for you? Or
I think that's just what I found worked for me. I just found that if I did that, because I am such a routine person, that if I did that chunk of words, no more and no less, like I never let myself even do a word less than the 1,200 words a day, that's just what worked in my brain and allowed me to feel like I'd done the word count, I'd moved the story along, and I could jump straight back into it the next morning as well and just
And you were
get
never
going
tempted to
because
come back to it later at night and edit or anything like that? You just...
There was times when I was lying in bed at night and I just thought of a great idea or a great sentence or a great way to move it forward, but I never went back to the actual manuscript. I normally just picked up my phone and wrote a couple of sentences in my notes section or a couple of ideas because I just write in Word. So at the end of my Word document, I've got probably 24 random sort of sentences and ideas and stuff that just sit at the end of the manuscript that I've got to remember to go back and be like, oh, hang on, I had this idea. I want to include this sentence.
Right.
Excuse me.
That's all right. You've wrote in first person point of view.
Yes.
What was your decision-making process in that to write from first person?
I think because of the way the story unfolds, I wanted the reader to be really close inside her head and to be seeing everything from Laura's perspective and not being able to have any of the outside viewpoints, being able to understand what's going on, because she's so suspicious and believes that there's something nefarious going on with Justin Jones. I wanted the reader to only be limited to her viewpoint, her thoughts, her evidence. I didn't want the reader to be able to see anything else that might be going on or get ideas from any other outside character.
Okay.
And I really liked that limited viewpoint as well, that the reader's going on this journey with Laura and finding out information with her, and it's a surprise to the reader at the same time as it's a surprise to Laura.
Yeah. So I'm jumping all over the place. Editing. So I was going to ask you about your typical day, but you've explained how when you were writing the draft, you wrote 1,200 words at 5 a.m.
Yes.
Did you do the same with the editing? How did you approach editing?
Yes, I found that hard because I'm such a methodical person. I was like, okay, so I can't edit a set amount of words a day. I just didn't think that worked. So I ended up doing amount of pages a day.
But at the same time? You did it at 5?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, at 5 o'clock I did it at the same time. And what I generally do is if I've got a round of edits due, if they're due in a month's time, then I'll work out how many rounds of edits I want to do, divide that by how many days I've got to do it, divide that by the amount of pages. And so I'll work out that I need to edit, say, 20 pages a day in the first round of edits. The second round of edits, I'll need to do 30 pages a day. So I sit down and I don't let myself leave until I've done that allotted amount that I need to do. And then I'll know that when it comes to the deadline that it's due by, it'll all be done.
Right.
And if I just follow that process, if I every day put in that work, make sure I hit that word count or that page count, I know that when I get to the deadline, I won't be scrambling, I won't be behind, I won't be stressed because I've done it methodically and got there at the set time.
Who are the biggest influences on your writing?
I think from a plot point of view for White Noise, it was my job, my background in corrections. That was the influence for the book. Author-wise, Candice Fox, I love Candice Fox. I just inhale everything she reads. Michael Robotham, just anything that he brings out, I would just exactly. I just add to cart, grab it from the shelf. I think those two were my biggest inspirations when I was writing. And Candice Fox actually, when I was writing, did a great, she called it Write Club.
Yes.
So
I was doing Write Club too.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So was it every Thursday morning?
I think it was Thursdays.
Yeah, she would go live on Facebook and everyone would write for an hour together. And then after that, she would answer questions from the Write Club members. And so that was such
really a generous thing of her to do, wasn't it? Inspiring, generous. I learned heaps. It was amazing.
Learned so much. She was definitely a big inspiration when I was writing as well.
And I would say that's a pretty good indication of, in my experience, of the author community in Australia. How's it been for you with that? Have you?
so supportive. I've actually never experienced anything like it. The amount of authors that have reached out to me and said, contact me anytime, I'd love to help. Authors that have just said, I've just bought your book, I can't wait to read it, I've pre-ordered, I'll write a review. It's just been incredible. It's just such a supportive industry, and there's no competition or jealousy. Everyone just wants
everyone else to succeed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I guess it's when one succeeds, everyone succeeds.
Yeah. More reading, more readers.
Exactly. That's what you want. You want amazing books to be out there and inspiring new readers and bringing new people to the genre or to reading in general.
Yeah. So you're working on book 2?
I am. So I'm working on that at the moment. That should come out around the same time next year. So that's set in Westmead Prison again. It's got the same range of characters. And this time it centres around a inmate who's a notorious murderer. He committed a really awful murder 15 years ago, and at the time never disclosed where he buried the victim's body.
Oh, okay.
And so it starts out, he has been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and doesn't have long to live. And the authorities at Westmead Prison want a last-ditch attempt at trying to convince him to say where the body, like to say where he put the victim's body, and to finally give the family some closure.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's about all I can say at this point without,
without
giving away any spoilers of White Noise.
Well, it would be remiss of me not to ask you 2 of Pam's favourite questions for authors. So first of all, what is at the heart of your writing?
I think redemption, second chances. I love showcasing a damaged woman who is still just doing her best. She's just getting up every day and living her life despite everything she's been through, despite all her challenges. She's a good person and she's just getting out there trying to do the best for others.
Yeah, okay. And what advice do you have, if any, for aspiring authors?
Yes, I think my number one piece of advice is to treat writing like a job before you've even got a publishing deal. I think once you do get a publishing deal, your publisher will expect you to write a book, or hopefully more than one, to a deadline. And so if you've got structure and routine in place before this even happens, I guarantee it'll be so much easier to just slip into that routine and get those words done if you've already got that routine down pat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, surrounding yourself with other authors or writers or people that are in the same boat, because writing can be such a solitary process. You're just sitting in a seat with your computer day in, day out by yourself. So it's really wonderful to have a community of people around you that are going through the same thing, that commiserate with you when you get rejections, can celebrate with you when you've got successes, no matter what those successes might look like, and just understanding the journey that you're on and helping if you get terrified looking at the blank page, when you get writer's block, or when you're just unmotivated and just dejected.
They get an edit back and you go, I don't know how to fix that.
Exactly. Because so much of writing is such a solitary process. I think having those people around you is just so important and makes it just so much more fun as well. Like having those people is just wonderful.
I so enjoyed chatting with you, Mercedes. Thanks so much for being generous in sharing your journey and all your advice and information. Congratulations.
You so much, thank you.
Huge congratulations on your fabulous debut.
Thank you so much.
I wish you all the success in the world and can't wait to see how things go and read the next book.
Thank you so much, Rae. I had a great time.